It says it's live streaming, so we think we're going to.
No, it still says it's waiting for me to do that. Is it mine? Is mine just not? It still says waiting.
Vicky, just can you get a moment to?
I admit it.
There it goes.
I think we're good to begin.
Recording in progress.
So Tiffany, you'll just turn your.
I'm looking for that.
Welcome to 2023, our first board meeting of the new year. Welcome, everyone. The Board of Education maintains a webpage on lewispalmer.org through which members of the public can find live streaming information and meeting records, as well as presentations and resources, which will be reviewed and discussed during this meeting. Ms. Wood, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Clausen,
Here.
Ms. Phillips,
Here.
Mr. Schwartz,
Here.
Mr. Taylor,
Here.
Ms. Upchurch.
Here.
Thank you. Let's see, I could lead us in a pledge of allegiance if you guys would join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, thank you. We'll jump right now into B1, which is a comprehensive strategic plan, key components and next steps. Dr. Summers, if you could lead your team in this session. And then just to confirm for the public's sake, is all of your team here?
Yes, all of our team is here.
I see everyone. So welcome to each of you as well.
Well,
Thanks.
thank you very much, Mr. Taylor, and thank you, board. And again, Happy New Year. And we appreciate the efforts toward, I believe this is our first actual hybrid meeting where we're both in person and using Zoom. So for those board members that are joining in remotely, thank you also for your attendance. And we are going to kick off here with our first item. And let me just set the stage for this meeting or work session as a whole. We're doing this in three parts. So part one, and this first item will be to reorient and refresh our current view of our strategic plan, including key components. So Mark is actually going to drive us through a presentation that will take us through a few slides and share with you something that we're excited about, because as we know, this is the ongoing evolution of our strategic plan. With what components are driving us toward where we're headed into the future. But we're going to spend a little bit of time just talking about where we've been, where we are, and how those steps are unfolding. And then that's going to set the stage for a deeper dive. And Chris Coulter and Brett Ridgway will be taking us through a presentation that will zoom in more on our operations plan, specifically the facilities capital planning efforts, and more of a longer term strategy. That I know is something we've all been working hard at and eagerly awaiting that update. And then we're going to close this meeting with the time we have remaining to spend some time exploring additional considerations around competitive opportunities. So that will build and extend from where we were at our last regular meeting all the way back to December. And that should round us out with a chance to do a little preview for our upcoming January board meeting, as well as share out those board reflections toward the end. So we're excited about a pretty meaty agenda, but we're ready to dive in. So with that, and this will be just a few slides here, as I mentioned, that we'll take you through. For me, it was actually helpful to reflect back to where we started on this process. If you guys can, for a moment, go all the way back to 2019 in December. We spent time in a work session talking about the value and the importance of a longer term strategic plan. So there's actually a link to that presentation that you can access. And then it really reminded me of how we spent our time in the aftermath of the bond election that did not pass back in 2019 to go toward all the what's next sessions. So if you recall, January and February, we actually spent time in every location with our community, our families, our staff, our students, and more. And that took us all the way to February of 2020. And it happened to be at the Space Discovery Center. That was our offsite retreat. And with the efforts of our board and all the feedback that we received from our community, we published an initial strategic plan draft with our 5 key priorities at the time. And that was March 6th of 2020, just happened to be a week before the pandemic and the COVID shutdown. So in terms of where we are today, and again, this is very high level, but we are in year 3 of that strategic plan implementation, where we've had multiple priorities and initiatives that have been addressed. And continuous feedback in this process has also led to a 6th priority around operations and facility planning, which I mentioned we'll be spending some more time on today. We've also spent some time, and I wanted to remind you back to the beginning of this year, where we spent an opportunity to really form some values and some value statements. So that will be a new share out in terms of our next iteration and evolution of this plan, as well as just a reminder that our 2.0 Portrait of a Grad and Educator work that is actually kicking off this Thursday and over the next 4 to 6 weeks. So we'll have a very robust culmination of all of the feedback again from our community in that effort. And we can spend some time talking through that a little bit if you'd like, but ultimately there's a new framework that is now ready for discussion. And as you know, our work continues. So here's our reveal in that effort. So where are we going again, and how are we getting there? So we've actually mocked up a little bit of a revised framework here with Mark's graphic design efforts. And so we're excited to get your feedback on this. It's interesting, our vision statement is not something that necessarily is pronounced or easily found right now. So we see the vision continuing to be something that is reflected from the feedback that we're getting both in our Portrait of a Graduate and Educator work. Obviously, we know it's about bright futures for our kids and preparing them for future success. But we think there's going to be some statement that will help really set this up even more as we formalize the vision. Next is our mission. And as a reminder, our mission is connected to one of the policies that we're working on revisiting and revising. So currently our mission statement, our traditional mission statement reads as Lewis Palmer School District is a partnership of parents, the community, and educators that aspires to prepare our students to be successful learners, productive citizens, and caring contributors to society. In LPSD, we seek to develop each student's talents in a safe, nurturing environment and to inspire a lifelong love of learning. And then, as you know, we have kind of shortened that down to a tagline of elevating every student every day. And what sits along the path of our star are now 6 priorities that really, again, are the most focal point aspects of our strategic plan. So, of course, our safe and healthy schools commitment, academic excellence, valuing our people, operations and facility planning, fiscal stewardship, and then relationships and communication. And then what you'll now see that we're excited to reveal are those values and value statements that are really foundational and pillars to our continued work. So integrity, where we value authenticity, courage, honest character, conviction, and trust. Respect, we value diversity, kindness, compassion, and fostering a sense of belonging. Connection, we value working collaboratively, empathy, and building relationships. Growth, we value challenge, a growth mindset, continuous learning, and persistent hope. And lastly, excellence, where we value modeling high expectations, stretching for optimal achievement and results. So that is our reveal. That is our next iteration. And we are excited for your thoughts and feedback about what resonates, what might be missing. I should add, this is not finalized where we've said this is it and something that we're going to publish across the board, but it is our latest version. And again, we're excited for ongoing feedback from our board and our community in this process. So with that, I'll open it up for
back a
questions.
couple of slides. I'd like to see the vision.
Sure.
And I assume those individual pieces are from the vision itself.
Yes, so specific to a vision statement that's under construction, we just wanted to call out that that's work that we see again represented in the ongoing collaboration that we have in these different.
Can you move forward again
Of course. How far?
to where I see the initial draft? Right there, stop.
Perfect.
So then each of those items that you just went through was these, right?
Value statements, yes. So core values are what we believe are at the essence of how we show up and how we act and how we engage and ultimately commit to what we're after within the organization day in and day out. It's how we do our work. It's how we go about our approach. If you recall, and I didn't bring the actual excerpt from this book, but we've been spending some time in the leadership challenge, and we use that framework at the beginning of the year to kind of talk about how the core values orient our behaviors, our attitudes, our efforts, and again, that spell out our commitments as an organization. So these were what we want to be careful not to do is just land on the word itself. The 5 values of integrity, respect, connection, growth, and excellence were framed from feedback primarily that we received through a couple of staff engagements. What I would add is that we recognize that these are statements that, you know, at some level, hopefully provoke our optimal state, as well as an opportunity to clarify, well, what do we actually mean by that, and how does that show up in the work that we do each and every day? But this is something that's actually been brewing a little bit. We just hadn't really revisited it since earlier at the launch of the school year.
And how does it align with the portrait of a graduate and a portrait of an educator?
It's a really good question. And what I would probably offer at this point is that we see this being very closely represented and reflected in the work that's going to take place within Portrait of a Grad and Portrait of an Educator. Those are not two separate parts. They're really intended to be something that is a seamless integration.
Hence why this is first draft.
Correct.
So it's still coming together
It's
based
coming
on
together.
other work that's going on.
Absolutely.
Like it. Any thoughts?
I like that the work's being done. And I appreciate when you answered a question I was gonna ask is where did this come from and how did it formulate? And I would hope that we would continue as you're formulating and growing with what our values are. How our students and our parents input and think and feel about this as well. And then my other question is, so where does this fit into? You have asked the question of where does this fit into our overall picture, but where does it fit into? I really like the graph and the presentation. How does it? Where does it visually fit? For better lack of better words. Like, okay, so when we look at our 5 goals and we look at our star, and is it just something that would be listed out on our website, or how does this become living, breathing a part of T38 or it?
Yeah, I think you're getting to the core of it. It's not just a document that sits there that is nice to look at. It really drives and propels everything that we do. And I think one of the takeaways that I continue to reflect upon in the development of our strategic plan is that's what's always out in front are those, well, it used to be 5, now 6 priority areas, which anything that we do, whether it's an action plan or a budget or a decision that we have to make within the boardroom, or even how that translates to school strategic plans, those priorities are going to be something that we benchmark all the work that we're doing against. A vision ultimately is where do we see ourselves and where is our future as we're continuing to move in that direction. Our mission is what we are committed to doing, how we go about that work each and every day. And those values just continue to be something that we think through and reflect upon. And I'll give you just one small example, Tiffany, and I think there's several others. We do a lot right now to try to call out the efforts of our staff and I would say even our students and parents with respect to kudos and shout outs and, hey, this was really good work. And one of the things that we might think about in our recognition efforts is that we use the value of, let's just use growth as an example. Some staff member or some student may demonstrate something that's really worthy of recognition within a growth value, right? And so that value could be reflected in a values award that we use to say, hey, we are recognizing you for this specific type of effort, whatever that growth might be. And that becomes another anchor to, this is how those values are lived out on a daily basis. That's just one example. The other thing, and maybe it'd be good for Mark to just talk a little bit about the communications vehicles that are going to help prop this up across.
Sure. I'd like to have each of the board members ask any questions or provide thoughts. Then I'd like to ask 6 people to kind of address their particular area and how they feel it fits into this. Like,
Sure.
safe and healthy schools, Rick, and academic excellence, Amber, and just kind of get a feel for what's your perspective on this presentation and how does it support what we're trying to accomplish. It's great. Before, or you?
Well, I still had another question. As you're developing through this, I like the initial thing. I'd like to be able to, I can't wait to see what it looks like as it develops, because I see a few things. For example, what jumped out of the page at me was connection and respect seem very similar in some ways. For example, empathy to me also fits into that respect piece of that compassion and empathy and fostering a sense of belonging. So I see some of these being crossed, but I don't see anything about with the connection. My first thought goes to the connection between the parents, the student, and the educator. So I'm excited to see how this develops, but I good work.
So the question is, how do you contribute to it? Is that?
That was going to actually be my next question is this just a presentation to the board, or are you looking for input from the board?
Both. And from everybody. So I think to your point, this doesn't just sit here. This is something that every individual within our community has some opportunity to, how they live it, how they experience it is absolutely critical to how we go about our work.
Are you going to, as you're going through these discussions, engage with the community in this?
Yes, absolutely. And I would argue, assert that this is what we've been doing.
Sure.
I think every presentation that we've had, every community engagement that we're in, this is the cornerstone, right? And even when we had the few that we had over the fall, we maybe didn't have value statements propped up, but we continue to revisit this through the lens of how our strategic plan is actually carried out on a day in, day out basis. So yes, it's so critical that this is not just, it's not a one and done. It's not a presentation that lives in this space. It's something that it's living, it's breathing. It's just the reference point and the opportunity to invite and inspire really everyone and anyone who's in our system to what we're striving for as Lewis Palmer District 38.
Ron has a comment.
And can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Thanks. So if it's okay, I wanted to add a couple things here that I trust might be timely. Just so that I think it's really important that all of us in this virtual and actual room are on the same page with what we're trying to achieve here. Usually, organizational values are what drives behavior and decisions, and they're the foundational elements of those two activities. So is that what we're attempting to achieve here?
That's what I heard.
Absolutely.
Okay. Therefore, in order to achieve that over the long range and make it bigger than any of us as individuals, so that it continues beyond whatever our tenures are and become, we need to drive it into the DNA of the organization, right?
Yes.
Okay. Therefore, based on those two premises, I would argue that most of these things are already part of the DNA of the organization. They're just not called out and graphically put onto some format that people can view. Is that fair?
I think that is a fair assessment.
So one thought therefore then is maybe we take a very, and Mark seems to be extremely well skilled in this area, a very simplistic graphical view of the 4 or 5 values and put them on our badges. Because the staff have to wear those badges every day, right?
Yep, that's another great suggestion / opportunity for operationalizing. Yep.
Yeah, and Ron, if I could, I totally agree with what you're saying. I just think that we might be a little premature to do it yet. Because
Right.
this is our first draft. And it's
Agreed.
typically saying, you know, how do we get feedback? And I
Yeah.
want to ask a follow-on question to what Tiffany was saying.
Mhm.
Do we coordinate this through Mark? Anything that we see that we question or we want to communicate about, do we give this, our feedback to Mark?
That'd be great.
Is that a protocol that works?
Absolutely. Great.
Sorry, Ron, I didn't want to forget that point, so keep going.
No problem, but here's where I'm going with all of this. If we all concur with this, then whatever we choose to do and whatever date we set as our deadline to achieve it, so that this isn't an intellectual exercise that goes on into perpetuity, but an executable task, so to speak, that we figure out a model to ingrain it in the organization over the long term. And so the example I wanted to cite was getting it on the badges, but the way to ingrain it through the organization is to make sure, as an example, just to give everybody a way to think through this, each of the building leaders on a periodic basis could ask the staff once in a while, hey, what are our core values? And make it a fun thing, have a little incentive where they have a $5 Starbucks gift card or something where it becomes part of the organizational thought process. And even to the, as a little detail-y, but we have 5 letters, IRCGE, as the top letters of each of the values, right? And maybe Mark can come up with a catchy phrase that incorporates those 5 letters that get people thinking and keeping rolling on this. That was what I wanted to make sure that we thought through, is that this is phenomenal work, but as Dr. Summers said, it can't just be something that sits on a PowerPoint. If we want to make it real, we have to embark on an ingrainment process that probably takes an entire school year. So it's a significant commitment, I guess, is ultimately where I'm going with this.
That's a great suggestion. And so what I'm hearing from Ron is a contest. What word can we derive from IRCGE? I bet there's quite a few different words that we could come up with.
So I already went online and did the unscramble thing.
Oh, you already won the contest?
No, I got bupkis. I got nothing. But that's why I wanted Mark to do, because he's far better at this stuff.
Well, that's good feedback, Ron. Matt, do you have any comments or questions?
No, I all around I like it. I think it's a great start, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this evolves.
Excellent. Teresa?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing the outcome of the portrait of a graduate, the portrait of the educator. And the way that my mind is sort of wrapping around this a little bit is that the core values at the bottom of the slide, everything will be funneling through those so that we are connecting very efficiently and very articulately the elevate every student every day to the portrait of a graduate, because ultimately that's why we're all here. And so I think that it's really important that as much as this looks great on paper and is a working document that we can all sort of formulate goals around, I think that really that connection for why these values are here needs to always be as strong as possible. And of course, that adds to the efficiency of all aspects of the way the district runs. But I just want to make sure that we still keep in the forefront that ultimately what we are doing is educating our kids every day to the best degree that we can, given limitations and all the other, operating parameters. So yeah, I think it's great. I think it's, waiting for the next portrait of a graduate portion of that is what's paramount in my mind.
Beautiful, thank you. Casey, do you want to just call around your group and have them weigh in if possible?
Sure. Why don't we start with Mark?
Appreciate that, because there's a couple of things that I'd love to respond to. The first one is, the first thing that came to my mind was, for if we wound up keeping these values with these letters, I don't know of any words with C, G, E, I, R, but you could kind of create something that sounds like surge, S or C, I, R, G, E. It sounds like S, U, R, G, E. I don't know, something to play with, and we'll continue to do that.
Grow rice.
What's that? Grow rice. You could do that too. That's a really good one.
Not really.
No, it's better than what I came up
That.
better than what I came up with. But to Teresa's point, not only does the portrait of a graduate, portrait of an educator fuel the vision, but we kind of envision this, if we were to keep a similar style moving forward, as like a front and a back page for handouts at meetings. It could also live as a printout that's framed with both in the printout, with both living side by side, branded in a very similar way, and hopefully flowing in a very cohesive manner. So to that point, what Ron said was, we want to weave this into all operational norms. We want leaders to be able to weave this into their meetings. We want our recognition to be tied back to strategic goals or the values. You'll start to hear these things, and if you already haven't, then that's a failure on my end. You'll start to hear these in statements. You'll start to see these in emails, as well as in our recognitions at board meetings. But execution wise, like I said, this will be physically printed across the district once we get to a place where we feel far more comfortable with it in its final state or semi-final state. It can always be growing and evolving. But also I want to call out that this is formatted for digital use as well. This can very easily convert into a website view where you can click on an element and learn a little bit more about it, or see how the organization is accomplishing those goals. And that's something that can always be growing. So that's what I would add from a communications vehicle point of view.
Good. Thanks, Mark. Amber.
I just want to echo Dr. Summers' comments about how we came to these words and descriptions. If you remember, during our retreat together back at the very beginning of August, I think it was, we all spent time identifying our priority values, and then all staff across the entire organization provided input, along with some students, I believe, especially at the high school level. I like the idea of looking at these through the lens of the portrait of a graduate and educator work, and the meetings and processes I've been involved with community members, providing students and staff providing input into. That work so far has also been very much considered in developing these descriptions. So just kind of echoing that it's been quite a long process to get to where we are right now with these, and we can continue to polish and improve. Are we talking about priorities, or just talking about values for right now?
I think what you said was great. I don't know if you want to touch on the academic excellence. That might be for a little bit later too, Mr. Taylor. So we can maybe just, pause on that.
Can I just make one suggestion?
In my past experience, so I appreciate what you were saying, Mr. Taylor, about how do we integrate this into everything we do. One of the positive experiences I've had in the past is using the organizational values as part of the hiring process. And so really looking at these values when we're identifying new employees who might be a fit or not with our organization, and building that into our processes for hiring.
Amber, you made a really interesting point about the values, and I remember the meeting, and as I recall, there was 100 values or whatever the number was that we all ranked and talked about and so forth, which made me think that these 5 may be right now. And depending on the agenda of a particular activity or meeting or whatever, those may change. So we have that flexibility as well to actually have the values associated with an event or an activity that we could be a little more flexible, right? Be, living document. Anyway, I just wanted to share that thought because you raised, as you expressed that, that's what my thoughts were. It's like, that could be really dynamic.
I'm seeing a quick note from Teresa. Do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, thanks so much. I just wanted to respond to Amber because I think the historical context, if you will, is really important. So that would be my only sort of minutia suggestion today, Mark, is that perhaps there could be a link when you're putting this up on the website so people can see the history that went into and the effort that went into gathering everybody's voices and really creating a document that represents the entire district.
Great point.
Brett, do you want to chime in?
I think maybe what I would add is that and we've already keyed in on it a couple of times, but this is a great opportunity to establish the vocabulary of the organization right there. And so I don't know if I push back is the right word, but I would maybe hesitate a little bit on this being too dynamic and too changing. It needs to have some reliability, some consistency to it. So these 5 values get the vocabulary established so that people can know what those words are, can have a good chance of quoting those words. And so not that they can't change, but they need to change with once where they're set, they need to change with great care and great intention and not very frequently, so that the organization doesn't feel like this is always in flux. And to Amber's point, we already have started to use a little bit of this in hiring process, a recent hiring process that Misty and I ran. We asked candidates what were the strategic goals of the organization, and that to me is an expectation of candidates, and it's an easy thing for candidates to demonstrate that they actually are interested in an organization rather than just showing up and seeing what job they can get. If they've done even the littlest amount of research on who we are, then they should be able to have something on that. So for me personally, from a business perspective, I like that integrity and excellence are kind of the boundary values, because that's kind of from the business perspective what we want to be able to contribute, and the inner values, I would call them, are what we're trying to do and support through education. So I like the way that it looks visually as well.
Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. I wanted to, certainly the operations and facility planning is set up perfectly for an opportunity within my world and the folks that I lead each and every day. But love the mantra of elevate. I can see no greater opportunity within any within multiple realms of the organization, but elevating every student every day. So many touch points that I see each and every day, whether it's on the facility side, the nutrition services side, whether it's on the transportation side of things. So many opportunities to sort of establish that mantra, establish those goals, establish that way of doing business in such a way that we are trying to elevate and improve and gather feedback and make those decisions that are strategic in nature. They're day to day, but they are strategic in nature and in the overall goodness of what it is that we are trying to do. But that is something that I will talk about here in a little bit. But you'll see in my presentation how we are trying to gather as much feedback as possible to make sure that we are improving the lives of every student every single day, every faculty member, every administrator and trying to gather feedback so that we can collectively get better with each step. And we are well on the march within doing that each and every day within the operations side of the house.
Two quick thoughts. First of all, I want to respond to Tiffany's comment that I thought was quite helpful, which is there's a lot of overlap here. And I think that's intentional and positive. One of the things that we tend to gravitate towards is siloing, and here's the integrity or here's the respect, and the two never cross. We've really seen some of that occur historically in Lewis Palmer around our departments. It's Rick's department and Rick's priority, or Amber's department and Amber's priority, and we're being really intentional about trying to break down what we would call silos or working in isolation, and bringing this together as a team. And the fact that you identified that overlap, I think, is exactly what I'm hoping to see within this organization, because we're being very intentional right now about overlapping our departments, overlapping our priorities, and overlapping our values. So I like the fact that they're not isolated and so different that you can't connect those dots. And then the second thing is, without those values, you can't attain these priorities. Growth and excellence leads to academic excellence. Respect and integrity leads to valuing people. So you can't really go anywhere without the values. So I like the idea of developing a connection amongst all of these pieces, because if you take one out, the others aren't going to work.
Thanks, Rick.
It's a perfect segue as I was thinking about these and how they're intertwined. And truly, they, just like Rick said, they all have to work together to make each one of these work. And to Amber's point, this is part of recruiting people, giving them our vision, what our values are, making sure it aligns with what their vision and values are. Those are the people that we want. Those are the people that we want here, because they are committed to the same things we're committed to. And so for me, having this visual is a really good tool to attract people to our district, because those are the people we want to be here. And like Brett shared, we're weaving that into, or we just did, into one of our processes. And I believe the person that we selected really has a good feel for what we're looking for as a district as a whole, because we do need to work together. So.
All really great points. Any other feedback at this point from our board?
I appreciate the work and effort. And what's interesting is, as I've listened to everyone, I remember all the work, right? I mean, this wasn't a presentation in and of itself. This is a summary of 3 years of effort.
That's right.
And that's a beautiful thing. And then I want to give a shout out to Brett, because one of the pillars of accounting is consistency. So I appreciate your perspective. Very good. Thank you.
Well, thank you as well. We appreciate the feedback and the ongoing feedback, as we'll continue to engage with our community in this. And we were excited to do kind of the official reveal with you all this morning. And this will be something that will be widely shared and distributed. And again, not completely finalized, but I think we'll be aiming towards something here in the next couple of months, so that it can be branded and it can be made more concrete or official as it lives and breathes in our system. So again, we're grateful for that. And yeah, sorry.
So if any thoughts, feelings, feedback, or questions pop up, just direct those to you, Mark. Okay.
And I would say you can talk to any of us about it, but Mark certainly is a good container, or his department of one is a good container for funneling everything to make it something that then gets shared out in words and in what we see. So yeah.
When I say this question, what resonates and what are we missing? And as I'm listening to you guys go around, and I appreciate the thought and the feedback and input that goes into this and the reminders. What still resonates with me, that's important to me, that I want to make sure that when we're talking about, what are we looking for when we're looking for folks that are going to be a part of our D38 community of educators. What still pops up to the top of my head is the importance of that engagement with families, with parents, students, and teachers. That is, to me, as a parent, that's important. That when I'm looking as a parent to the school district, that was something that was important to me. Was what building, when I walk in, do I know that I, as a parent, can walk into that building, and that I, as a parent, am engaged in my students' education, and that my educators, my teachers, my kids' teachers welcome and appreciate and applaud that I, as a parent, want to be involved in my children's education. So that's what, and I don't know where that fits in, but that's just something that's.
I just would say what you just described is how it comes to life. And if I can just really briefly, last Thursday, actually, we've had a couple of sessions with the Bear Creek staff as we're working on their new principal hire. And we had a family session with about 10 parents that showed up. And what you would be so proud of, Ms. Upchurch, is what you heard from those parents is exactly what you just described. And so when we're actually talking about what are the strengths right now of our system and who are we looking for in a new leader, I can't, like what you just said echoed everything that we heard. We've got another session tonight, actually, where I anticipate it'll be. So what I don't want to create is a thought that this is so distant from what we're actually doing, because it absolutely is lived into our system. And I think Ron kind of put this point out there earlier. A lot of this really is already in our DNA. It just maybe hasn't been solidified. It's something that you can see in a one-stop shop. That was sort of my challenge to Mark, is can we do it as a one-pager and then connect that portrait of a grad and that portrait of an educator, because that will be really critical work that also comes forward, that I think anyone that's researching us or anyone that's making a decision about where to send their kids or to be an employee here or not will feel that and then know that it's there in the actions and in the things that actually take place day in and day out. So thank you for calling that out.
Can I build on one thing that?
Yeah,
they brought up? We'll never leave this subject if we keep going, but that's
true. Good point.
I'm wondering, you know how we have the ability for doing public comments online?
Yes.
Is it possible that we could have a suggestion inbox online and actually open this up to the community?
For sure. Yep.
Right, because I appreciate all of our input.
Yep.
I really do.
Yep.
And it is reflective of 3 years of hard work,
Mhm.
but it would be interesting to see what kind of feedback, and it's just one mechanism,
Yep.
one avenue of feedback, but it would be an interesting test to see what kind of interaction we got.
We've been toying with just a general submit feedback button on our homepage so that anybody can always submit feedback in real time about any topic, but specific to this, yes, we can open it up specific to this, or we can launch it with this as a starting point. One of the two.
Yeah, it's a little, yeah. Good. We done?
I think so.
That was 15 minutes.
It was a little bit longer than what we had anticipated, but that's okay.
Is worthwhile. So our next item is B2, operational norms and status update. Mr. Coulter is going to walk us through a presentation that he's spent a lot of time on, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. 2 or 3 times. Hey, good morning, everybody. First, I want to say congratulations to Mark, because this is great work. It gives a lot of pride and a lot of enthusiasm for the folks that are able to sort of say, hey, we're a part of what's going on in 38. And I want to congratulate him. We can maintain and take care of our facilities in the same manner. I think we're doing great work. So appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Today, we are going to talk a little bit about an operations update, but we are most specifically going to talk and we are going to dig into the facility side of things. Do we need to?
I'm working to try to
Okay,
get that.
sorry, I lost you.
Yeah, it wasn't opening the way I wanted it to.
Okay, no problem.
Give me 1 second. Is it working for you or not so much?
Yeah, it's on. It is closed on. It's on the side panel, right side.
Oh,
I'm gonna do full screen.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
How's that look?
Phenomenal. Thank you. Thank you. Again, good morning, everybody. Again, we're going to talk operations update and really talk most specifically about facilities capital planning. And we're going to throw a lot of numbers at you, but hopefully we'll be able to sort of walk away from this. And at the end of the day, you'll kind of understand and sort of have a very, very good foundational understanding as to how we are making decisions, how we are planning, how we are sort of determining good, good, poor, satisfactory, unsatisfactory in our day-to-day operations as it relates to something as important as our facilities, as our 9 separate facilities, as well as all of our support infrastructure in those lines. Okay, goals for today's presentation. First and foremost, what do we want everybody to walk away from in terms of understanding of a facilities conditions goal? What is excellent? What are we moving towards? What do we call that? And how do we achieve that? When we talk about, and we have talked about in the past, FCI, Facilities Condition Index, we're sort of more moving towards the Extended Facility Condition Index, because that sort of includes improvements and those functionality aspects that are very, very intrinsic and associated with what we're trying to accomplish in schools. And then we're going to look at sort of an annual facilities operations capital funding strategy, what that model looks like even for next fiscal year. We have those documents, and we'll have an opportunity to sort of balance that with Brett's approach in terms of how we are tracking that, how we are setting that up, and how we are funding those things. And then a report on facilities and operations, what we are going to go towards and what we're going to move towards, and what you should be looking for in terms of quarterly updates as it relates to both energy management, facilities management, and day-to-day, how we are sort of gathering feedback from our leaders in respective schools as to making sure that we are doing the things inside those schools that they would like to see. So what is, capital planning? Right there in the middle, I think, the strategic facilities goals determine short-term tactical project plans. So you might say, hey, so what are we doing this summer? Hopefully that's not going to be a surprising type of thing to both the folks that are in this room, as well as the folks that are at individual schools. And the folks that are within my organization on the facilities and the maintenance side of things. We talk about this every single week about what's going on, what the priorities are, how we are going to continue to prioritize those things, and what leverage and what sort of contingencies that we have, because things don't always work out the way that you may have planned. So how are we doing that? How are we setting that up? And then how are we communicating that in a consistent manner on a day-to-day basis with our leaders at our respective schools. Okay, here's the first slide as we start to look at facilities operating standards. You can see the bubble there in the middle. So what we are doing is we're looking at, hey, we got to look at that combination between where we are funded and whether or not you have the dollars and cents to support what it is you want to do in buildings. And then that red line under facility condition index, there is a sort of meeting of those two different things. When you don't have the funds, obviously your facility condition index is going to drop. When you do have the funds, you're going to be able to do things related to facility condition index that sort of land you at one of these conditions. We're looking at everything in excellent condition, to fair condition, poor condition, and crisis. Excellent is really sort of in two different buckets on that stewardship, on that comprehensive stewardship side of things, as well as a showpiece facility. But I would argue that we are probably in Lewis Palmer School District more in probably that fair condition in terms of managed care, but we want to stay very, very far away from reactive management. We want to make sure that those preventative maintenance side of things, as well as sort of that leading edge and sort of getting into those things that we anticipate. We don't want to be completely reactive, nor do we want to be even majority wise reactive as to what it is that we are doing, because that is reflective of a facility organization that is in poor condition.
So Chris, just to be clear, this presentation is illustrative only, not demonstrative of our current state.
We have that as well.
But this presentation I'm looking at is illustrative.
So far,
it doesn't demonstrate what D38's condition is.
It will, and in a couple more slides.
This one doesn't.
Get to slide 8. Yeah.
The slide.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
we're right on 4, so that's why I'm asking the question.
No, that bubble there is not us. That's just to grab your attention to, there is a
So
cross,
it's in
there
the
is a.
ready for discussion.
Correct.
I got it.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chris. That was my question also. I want to make sure those curves were not relevant to our scenario.
Well, we're diving into more of that.
Right.
About to.
Yeah, so I mean, we just want to sort of understand and develop the vocabulary associated with really where we are and how we look at facilities going forward, so that this won't be an introduction going, in future years as well. Okay, so what are we aiming for? We're aiming for excellent condition. That's 0 to 20% of CRV. CRV stands for current replacement value. And you can say, hey, well, current replacement value, is that a one-time type of thing? No, it's not a one-time type of thing, because that's consistently iterative as to, when you say current replacement value of a facility, it's not just the structural and the foundation and things like that. It's everything that is inside that building, whether it be software, whether it be books, whether it be desks and chairs and those various different types of things. So what is the current replacement value of our facilities? And as you can imagine, with respect to each year, that number is going to go up, so that value in terms of what are all the different things that we need as it reflects and as it's divided by the current replacement value, we want to sort of stay in a certain mode of trying to keep that value at 20% or better. Most facilities, in terms of the information that I have read, most facilities, 20%, if they can achieve 20%, that is fantastic. That is a very, very good thing. But in terms of the realities of the continuous nature of buildings and renewals and the work that has to go on, 25% seems to be a number that people are sort of wrap their heads around, that if we can do better than 25% in terms of industry standards, but sort of we want to do better than industry standards, but that's where the industry might be. So they're more in that fair area, which I would argue that we probably are in. So we are reflective of where most school districts would find themselves, and or folks that sort of maintain lots of facilities.
So Chris, again.
Yes.
Clarification.
Yes, sir.
Current replacement value, right? Like if I think about that in my home, the insurance that I carry on my home, it's really about replacement value. If it burned down, what's the replacement cost? That's not what we're talking about here, is it?
No, we are talking about that. That's how we actually distinguish, and that's how we balance that, as we actually talk with our insurer about what are they showing, what do we insure, because it's everything inside that building. That's how we would determine that number.
The percentage range, because I'm lost. It says 0 to 20% of the CRV. What does that mean?
It's 0 to 20% in terms of all the different things that need to occur, the issues that we have, the improvements that we want to seek,
So not really
the replacement of these various,
to bring it up to par or to excellent condition.
right?
It's
So yeah, Ron has a comment on the text chat, which I think might help, which is 0 being like new condition. Right, like new condition, everything is there, 0 pristine. So we have 0 need, if you will, 0 needs. And then as those needs pile up, the percentage of replacement value it takes to get back to that like new condition gets bigger and bigger. So that's kind of, I believe, the way that comes together. Is that true?
You want to be as close to 0 as possible.
That's best case scenario.
If you're within 0 to 20, you're at least in an excellent, according to industry standard, that keeps you at a facility that's an excellent.
When you add up all the different things that need to occur in your building, you add all those things up, and how you sort of divide that by the current replacement value, that gives you that index. That gives you that decimal.
I now understand better. So current replacement value is exactly what it means, right? If we're at 10%, that means we've got 10% of work to get it back to that state of current replacement.
Of the like new excellent
Based on repairs and maintenance, whatever.
Improvements.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I was confused.
It's the one time you want to strive for a 0 on a school.
To be excellent.
Yeah.
That's actually, that's exactly right. You want to try to get the lowest score possible.
I got it. I got it.
So this is a bit like golf.
That's another good, well, you want to be under, right? I don't know if there's a negative score.
Well, you can certainly count on me to underachieve.
We're glad you're here.
Meaning of terms, when we talk about deferred maintenance, we talk about preventative maintenance. That's really focusing on what I would argue, and the industry would argue, is those are all catch up. Those are things that you're not improving, you're not pushing the envelope, you're not going above and beyond. You're not addressing those things that might be improvements to facility space and facility operations. Catch up is exactly what it says. You will continue to just sort of continue to throw pennies into that puddle in an effort to hopefully one day maybe catch up, or maybe even get to a situation where you're in a more of a renewal aspect, where you're sort of keeping up, where you're doing things that the building is achieving the goals and sort of keeping up with the changes that are occurring within every single facility that we manage and operate. And then improvements are certainly the get ahead, things that may happen that hopefully are scheduled. But sometimes those improvements, I think at Palmer Ridge this last year, we've seen some of those things associated with get ahead types of things that were things that needed to happen. They were probably keep up items, but they certainly resulted in a get ahead and an improvement, going through those improvement types of efforts associated with the geothermal system out there.
But all three drop the percentage.
All three have correct. All three draw a percentage in terms of catch up are probably going to be a little bit higher number. Keep up are going to be, the number gets a little bit lower, and then in the get ahead, your numbers are going to be at the lowest end. Correct.
Quick question for you.
Go ahead.
So the last time we went to the stakeholders with a bond, shortly before, we had a consulting firm inspect all the buildings, and they determined that deferred maintenance was right around 50 million. Do we have a sense for and I see the graphs and so forth, do you have a sense for if that's an accurate number or if it's even in the ballpark?
We do. We do have that. We are in the midst of that process, building off of what RTA, I think, was the architecture firm that sort of worked collaboratively with the school district. And I have loaded all that information into a data set, into a spreadsheet. But at the same time, now we are in a situation where we need to begin engaging. And you'll see that in the spreadsheet that I'll show here in a little bit, engaging, whether it be building managers, whether it be principals, whether it be teachers, coaches, whomever, within each of our schools. What are those different things that we need to be doing and tracking that will put us into a situation that hopefully we end up, being able to fund it and being able to lower those numbers associated with CRB.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, baby. I need to point it at the thing.
How's that? There we go.
Oh, here we go. Okay, that's perfect. That's the cue. Okay, so here is a snap out of, this is just a cut and paste out of the spreadsheet that I just mentioned that we are building. But you can see it, we'll work it from left to right. But you'll see that priority column. That priority column, again, you can see it's not filled out because I haven't had those. I have just introduced this particular spreadsheet to schools, to building managers, to principals, to APs, to folks that are in these respective schools, so that we can understand what are the various different things. And then do we need to add particular projects or add improvements or add different things that are going on in each of our schools, so that we understand what it is that we need to get ahead and to keep up with the things that are going on in our individual schools. Everything else you see that is in the spreadsheet are those things that came from RTA, and the way that we have balanced it, you'll see that big curve. We've balanced it in what we call category 1, and we've also balanced it in what we call category 2. Category 1 being time to failure, and then we combine that with mission impact. So if you have a low time to failure, if it's imminent, or you're within a shorter period of time, and it's going to affect the impact of your building, those are the items that are going to be that would be a 4 and a 4, and so that would be an 8. In terms of how we look at those various different things as we move those things across, or 4 and 4, it would be a 16. So you'll be a 16 in those ranks. Because you see those ranks 1 to 16 going across from left to right. So for example, an example of something that would be a 16 would certainly be roofs. Roofs are those things that we want to take a look at. One, they are expensive, but they certainly are mission impactful, and we all sort of understand what the time to failure is, because we start to see ceiling tiles that are demonstrating those various different things that we have leaks, and we have various different things that are going on. But this is the spreadsheet that we put together, and we've also addressed it. You'll see the improvements or deferred maintenance. We're tracking that as well, so that we understand, hey, are we focusing on deferred maintenance? Are we focusing on improvements, or are we focusing on other? And those are the types of things that are tangible to the folks that we are doing these projects for, as well as the folks that we are sort of looking at, hey, what is it going to cost to get all this stuff done? And are we doing things that are deferred in terms of their category, or are we doing things that are what we would consider to be improvements, and things that are sort of pushing the threshold and pushing the scope of work, or pushing what is capable within the four walls of that school.
And just this example doesn't show any renewal. It just happens to be
No,
deferred maintenance and improvements.
no, and a lot of times deferred maintenance. I think a lot of people sort of categorize deferred maintenance and capital renewal together. A lot of times those are categorized together. I don't think we can sort of be in a situation where we can sort of split those two out, but I think deferred maintenance and improvements, there's a categorical change.
Hey, Chris,
Yes.
can you give us an example too of capital renewal?
Capital renewal, that would be improvements to, let's say we have a situation where we have VFDs that are on the pumps on a particular boiler system, and those VFDs need they need new controls associated with what is going on, because they're working off of controls that are talking to balancing valves within those systems. Sometimes those things wear out. Sometimes those systems, especially understanding that these are technology-based systems, a lot of times they are talking to each other, and a lot of times, especially with what we see with some of the things that Schneider is doing, because we're changing the entire controls paradigm in a particular building and or system, a completely different baseline, a completely different sort of way of doing things. We need to improve, and we need to sort of do the things that are associated with improvements. I know we're not supposed to use the word improvements, but that would be a deferred maintenance item. That would be something that we need to do to sort of make sure that on the control side of things, our maintainers are able to read those controls in such a way that they are able to interpret it in terms of the day-to-day operation within those schools.
Okay, here's the rationale behind my question. Does that mean it requires segmented or ring-fenced capital to do it? Or does it mean that it should be something we're able to budget in on a non-specific basis? For example, can we budget in 1% of our annual revenues for this kind of stuff if that's what's necessary? Or do we need to, when it comes up, address it with some kind of a capital renewal fund?
That's a very, very good question. That's an anticipatory question in terms of the realities of what's going on. We would hope that, knowing that we are keeping a better eye on what's going on in our buildings, we see when things, through the preventative maintenance side of things, we see when things are starting to slip. So what we can do is we can start to build budgets for that, and we can cover that out of the year-to-year operating budget. Hopefully it doesn't run itself into a situation where it's a new capital improvement, a capital reserve type of project, but maybe it's something that is emblematic, that is going on at 3 or 4 schools or 5 schools or something of that nature. So, but we have to have our eyes on what's going on. We are measuring, we are tracking, but having a better understanding of what's going on in these individual buildings, we can sort of keep those numbers as low as possible, and sort of deliver a solution financially that is within the day-to-day operating budget within our whether it be our maintainers or our grounds folks, and it doesn't sort of find itself in the capital reserve. But you'll see in the program that I'll show you in a little bit, there are projects that are capital reserve in nature that are a little bit bigger. Roofs, for example. There are things, paving projects that you'll see that are a little bit bigger, and they're not a one-time type of small improvement to make sure that we get through the next month or the next quarter or the next year. They're a little bit bigger project.
So if I can attempt to summarize your answer, it appears that what you're saying, and I want to make sure I have it right, not just from me, but from our peers as well. There are thresholds that we keep an eye on. And when they cross a threshold, and then there are a few significant items that require significant capital. And those two are looked at differently and accounted for and budgeted for. And Brett, is that factual?
Yes, and we have an illustration or a slide that will kind of restate that later on as well.
Thank you.
Okay, we have been talking a little bit about, CRV, EFCI, and various different things. This is the slide that is a good understanding of what is the current replacement value at each of our schools. We look at everything from total square footage to CRV. We are also starting to take a look, and we have a slide on this a little bit later, where we take a look at KBTU per square foot per year, or what we call EUI, energy use intensity, in all of our schools, utilizing the energy, both electricity and natural gas. We also build that off of thresholds, sort of national thresholds in terms of what is outstanding performance, good performance, and sustainable performance. But you can see what those EFCI values are. And again, 20% and less is excellent. So we are in a situation where some of our schools are well over 20%. But as I mentioned before, I think that in the industry, 25% and less, okay, that's the reality of it. You're doing what you need to do. But certainly those areas that you see a 48 over at Grace Best, and you see some things that are moving well above 25 in some other schools. That's where it's going, that spreadsheet that we showed a little bit earlier, working with individuals in schools and sort of assigning where those priorities are, is going to ultimately end up being, hey, are those cap reserve projects and something that we see at a lot of schools, or are those projects that are smaller projects that we can sort of address within our operating budget? But this is the first, this is that slide that I mentioned a little bit earlier that sort of looks at, if you're able to index your EFCI at each of your individual schools. We will continue to build on this in a quarterly fashion so that we understand where we are within each quarter, and you as board members can understand, hey, how are our facilities doing?
We need to add our admin building, our facilities buildings, so I wouldn't limit it just to your schools.
We don't have EFCI on those buildings, but we are measuring. But I completely agree with you. But we are definitely measuring right now energy efficiency at all those schools and KBTU per square foot at all those locations. But you're right. Things do need to happen in those buildings, whether it be painting or other improvements that might need to occur.
So this is the slide that relates to Matt's earlier question about what are our outstanding capital needs right now. And so if the math is inherent in this slide, or it can be drawn from this slide. If you have the CRB column and you have the EFCI column, you do that math, that multiply those together, that comes up with what your capital needs are, basically. And so the sum of this whole list would be about $55 million. And it's different for each school, of course. And I think you probably would want to have Grace Best as its own line. So here's without Grace Best, and here's with Grace Best, which is like 40 million plus 13 million equals or gets you over that 50 range. So,
but as a district, we have responsibility for these other buildings.
True.
My point.
True.
So it's not totally a.
No, these are the school facilities. Schools. Right.
Crazy Best is on there.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, just to back up, so we understand what FCI, EFCI, and you also see a mention of facility needs index. Facility needs index even goes beyond, I think, where the extended FCI sort of addresses, but facility needs, that starts to get into things like energy efficiency, audio visual, data collection, regulatory compliance, and you see the couple of things that are noted there in this particular sheet. But we want to find ourselves somewhere in that bubble, that red bubble that you see there, in terms of where are we between sort of keep up and get ahead. That's where our happy place is going to be, and that's where we're trying to sort of make sure that we empirically land somewhere in between those keep ups and get ahead, and that's the focus of our approach that we are utilizing today, and our funding recommendations that we are utilizing today. Okay, extended FCI, just it's one more time, condition and functionality needs. That's where we start to move FCI in terms of deferred maintenance relative to current replacement value. When we start to move to extended facility condition index, which I think is more emblematic and more reflective of what the real needs of schools or other facilities might be, because you need to address functionality, because the likelihood that functionality changes are going to occur is actually pretty great. Within the pedagogical changes that might occur in schools, within the other things that might be occurring in schools, for everything from music to athletics, inside the building, outside the building, and various different things that are going on. Those functionality needs, and that's where that feedback from folks that are actually at the schools is so important. So here's a look at Lewis Palmer School District. Here's a look at all of our schools with FCI. Then we also have the line in there at the 20%, that excellent condition. And then you can also see where we are in terms of EFCI, that line, that maroon line that you see that kind of goes from left to right. But you can see where things start to get above that 20% or even that 25%, moving towards Grace Best. But then this gives a graphical representation of, hey, these are some schools where, hey, what can we do to make sure that we stay well below that 20% line to the degree possible, while at the same time, we're looking at our high schools. That's where, I'll be honest with you, the high schools, we don't have that feedback from them in terms of, from their leadership, from their building managers about, hey, what are the needs that they would like to see? That's why you see those schools performing so excellently in terms of facility condition index right now. But we hope to certainly have in the next quarter, we'll have that feedback from those high schools, and I would anticipate that those numbers would jump a little bit at our high schools. Although if you walk through Palmer Ridge High School and Lewis Palmer High School, they look great. They look great. They feel great, and it seems like they're fulfilling what the kids and the students and the teachers need. The path. This is this is the catch-up sequence, and you'll take a look at this. Is that Minioc Tech company. They provide software for facilities maintenance and looking at your facility condition. But this is the reason why catch-up is not a good tool to use to sort of tell you how you're doing. As you can see, what I bubbled there in the red, all it is looking at is the predictive maintenance of what is going on. And if we are going to run around and say, hey, everything that we are determining in terms of our condition of our facilities is based on what the software and what the predictive maintenance side of things tells us, then we're missing those functionality aspects. We're missing those other things in terms of feedback from the schools to understand, hey, how are our facilities doing, and are they really being able to be used in such a way that is moving the threshold, and we are being able to elevate every student every day in what is going on inside classrooms and inside the support spaces within those schools.
Chris, can I pause you?
Yeah.
Ron had a question.
Oh, go ahead, Ron.
This is a great graphic to give us an idea of predictive versus
Right.
unplanned or unpredicted maintenance. Do we have any historical data that shows over the last 60 months, for example, this is what we budgeted and figured was likely to happen, and here's the actuals? And if, let's just say we, for lack of a more defined model, that we underpredicted by 20% and it was $1 million a year, is it as remedial or simple as moving the number to 1.2 million? And obviously, the more we defer, the bigger that number becomes, right? But what do we physically know from what's happened, I guess, is my ultimate point.
What we haven't, honestly, from what I have seen, we sort of haven't had sort of an EFCI sort of predictive look at things from a functionality and what's next aspect. We certainly we could dig into data associated with what the costs were and how we funded the maintenance operations to address predictive maintenance. But this current replacement value and looking at things and this type of approach, the district, from what I can tell, maybe I don't know if anybody has any more history, but what we are doing now gives us a little bit better look and a little bit more detailed look at the A to Z aspects instead of maybe just the A to M aspects what is going on in our buildings. But in terms of the history, in terms of what it has been funded, I think there are index values that the district may have used in the past.
Well, I think there would be a way, Ron, to look at the spends that we've done in the last 18 months, if you will, and say which of those spends did we really see coming and which popped up for us. And so I think that might be kind of what you're getting to, is what were we able to plan and execute as we planned it, and what did we have to react to because it came at us with less predictability. Is that true?
Yeah, also I want to be cautious to not create a make work project. Right?
Yeah.
The question is it a value to do it?
There's value to it because when we, and we'll talk, I think some about this later, but when we go into a new budget season and we talk about how much, what are the level projects that we are planning for, and then what is the contingency that is being available for the things that are not planned. And
right.
that mix of what is planned versus contingent should have some reflection of what our past experience has been.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Okay, so building a facilities capital plan. These are suggestions and looking for your feedback as to what you think might be areas to maybe spend a little bit more time on, or areas to embellish a little bit or pursue a little bit more deeply. But start with a 5-year plan. I don't think we want to look at a 1-year plan and a year to year to year. That sort of doesn't sort of create the proactivity associated with the planning that's necessary to make sure that we are able to maintain whether it be budgets or whether we're able to maintain facilities in such a way that we are able to anticipate what is coming. Identification of critical repairs and life safety issues, those certainly rise to the top of the list. Those things that might be ADA related, life safety certainly related, and those things that we would cause or call critical. Documented identification, that's what that spreadsheet and those things that you saw a little bit earlier that had that priority column in it, as well as the category 1, category 2 side of things. That's where the documentation is now beginning that we are going to be able to build upon years and years and years. Consideration for current improvement projects and what those things are that are functionality based, so that we can know what we need to do or plan for or budget for related to what those things are going to be that would be categorized as the get aheads. And a list of capital projects, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I have that in this slide of what the capital project recommendations are for next fiscal year. Continuing in the capital plan, a ranking or scoring of those projects, and that's exactly what we're doing by ranking that and then looking at the category 1 and category 2. We have cost estimates associated with those. A cost table sorted by building and systems that are being affected and ranked. We are doing that as well now. Recommended schedule for replacement. So we have to look at this certainly for next fiscal year. But then again, if we're looking at it over the course of 5 years, we need to look at, what are those things that we can do maybe this fiscal year that can carry down and help us out in future fiscal years. Or maybe we skip a year and then we address that in the following fiscal year. But that's the collaborative nature that we can start to generate and document going forward, so that we understand where we are in facility capital repairs. And then that timetable is so important, so that we understand from a funding side of things. And the timetable is so important, especially as we understand today in today's market, because timing is everything. You saw with the nature of the buses and the price and the values of those actually escalated over the time that we talked about that. Construction materials are in the very, very similar situation. The price that I get or that you would get today in 7 days or in a month from now or 2 months from now, that price is probably going to be going up. So multiple bids are very, very important, but at the same time, multiple bids are probably only as good for maybe a 30 or 60, maybe even a 90-day window because of the critical nature of timing and the schedule that contractors are under right now. This is something for you all to absorb, but I think the graphical representation is very, very accurate. You see what is what is actually lasting longer. Those are those mechanical types of things that are up in ceilings and in walls. Those are the blue bar that have definitely a longer life cycle these days. They are very, very complex systems, but they definitely have a longer life cycle than those things that you see on the red side of things. And that would be the space or the functional aspects again that are associated with the independent and the collaborative programs that we see in each and every school. And you'll see that just to the right of that, where it talks about program churn. We want to make sure that those improvements are addressing what the program churn might be in a particular space, whether it be taking the wrestling mats and putting those wrestling mats up into the ceiling, like we did at Lewis Palmer High School this year, whether it's the paving projects that we did, whether it's the leach field repairs and improvements that we did at Prairie Winds Elementary School this year. You're going to have some program churn, and you need to anticipate that. And that's what Brett was talking about in terms of that contingency factor. But the ability to anticipate and to document those anticipated items is very, very important. Does Ron, Teresa lost power? Okay. Okay.
On
I'll get her to dial in on audio.
back one slide if you could.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What's pre-war, post-war, modern? And
those are the different eras that associated with when the United States of America really saw sort of very, very rapid building. Certainly pre-World War II, post-World War II, the modern area was kind of coming out of, sort of, obviously post-World War II, but kind of coming into the late 70s, mid 80s, there was another sort of industrial and facility revolution. And then we see sort of where we are in the complex area, and that's really 1985 to present. And we kind of see what those, where we're focusing and where those projects might be landing these days.
And if I interpret the graph, the pre-war, the life cycle of structural, mechanical, and space or program is 50 years.
And I completely agree. And if you look at buildings that are built, like, for example, at Colorado College, nobody can afford to build those buildings where everything's real stone and everything's done in a certain way that they're built for the 50-year horizon.
And post-war, then it's under 20.
Right.
And modern, what time frame was that again? Modern?
85.
From 85
to 85.
Up to 85.
Up to
Up to 85. And then complex is kind of beyond it.
Okay, so current state, if you will, is the complex.
Very much so.
And there, structural mechanical is basically designed for almost 35 years. And the space or program is almost down to 5.
Right.
So they're trying to turn it into consumables somehow.
Well, absolutely, because so many things are changing, especially in the academic side of the house. So many things are changing to accommodate. Let's face it, especially, this is sort of a slide. It was more focused on the higher education side of things, but you can see on the academic side of things, what are kids interested in? What do kids need to be interested? Whether it be the technology, whether it be the various different things that are sort of very, very dynamic. They move very, very fast, and that's why the buildings built a long time ago are very, very good. They don't accommodate space very, very well, or space flexibility, or the mechanical systems that you might need. So you have to change those things that are very cost additive, but the ability to sort of change spaces to accommodate different functions within the space is an asset.
So another way of saying it, instead of life cycle, it isn't life cycle of its facilities index, it's more a life cycle of its use.
Useful life. Yeah.
Useful life.
Useful life. Yeah.
Because it gets dated.
Mm-hmm. And it's where those dollars are going to go. And are we anticipatory in terms of where those dollars and how we need to sort of ask the schools, hey, what can we do to change things in such a way that is going to accommodate you?
Yeah, we need space that is modular or is flexible, right? Can be on a more rapid basis.
And programs are changing dynamically.
As a result, that's what is driving.
Some of the things that we've been talking about related to intercom systems and things that are going on with voice attenuation that is going on inside schools. I mean, those are those changes that.
But that's the reality we live with today.
Right.
Question here?
No.
Ron's got a question.
Ron, go ahead.
Actually, I may have interrupted Tiffany. Please, Tiffany.
I was just gonna say, when when in all the sessions I've attended in over the last 5 years, at visiting with different school districts across the state and across the region, that is the reality of education. 10, 15 years ago, the programming and the requirements to educate a student were different than they are even today. So that's why, for example, Littleton, when they go to their voters, for example, they know, okay, we can't have 50-year-old buildings can't educate a student anymore. So they have their cycles of this is when we're going to have to repair, this is we're going to have to fix our maintenance. This is where we stay ahead. This is where we need to start rebuilding another school. And I think 50 years that's a long ways out. I'm not saying that's where we should be, but that's what I've heard across the state is, I think a good example is vestibules. Back when my children first started school, most schools didn't need or have vestibules or man traps or ways to have the security measures in place that we need to have today. So that's where the infrastructure of education changes and the needs of the learner changes. We didn't know enough about children that are on the autism spectrum or trauma informed, the need to have more trauma informed programs in our schools. So as things change, I can see why this changes, because back then, pre-war, not as many children were even going to school. So there's the wear and tear on the facility as well. A lot more children are going through the buildings as well. So which is a good thing that we have a more educated society, but that also
Here on Tuesday.
doesn't help on the wear and tear of the facilities.
I'm gonna give the exact.
Your points are well made, and you're right in line with what we are seeing and what the industry is seeing.
And Ron, before you pop in real quick, I was going to ask a question, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself on best grants. We always get talked about and asked about best grants. And back in 2010, there was $18 billion in deferred maintenance across the state of Colorado. So it's not just a D38 issue. Last year, best grants, there was 800 something, almost $9 million in requests, and only 400 million were able to be fulfilled. So this is a Colorado issue. It's not just D38. We have been successful at getting best grants for roofs, boilers, small things, those things that need and are immediate. Canyon Schools District was able to get a best grant to be able to completely fix one of their entire facilities, which was a huge ask, but they also had, if I'm not mistaken, had to ask their taxpayers to pay the other half, because best grants isn't just all free money. So they had to go to their taxpayers. How are school districts like Canyon City able to be successful at replacing an entire facility, and D38 is only able to be successful at fixing rooms and boilers with best grant dollars?
So I sit on the best board.
Oh, did not know that.
Yes. And it's a hard task that the best board is assigned. And so a couple of things. One, each school district has its own calculated match percentage requirement based on demographic factors and things like that. So Canyon City's match percentage is much lower than what D38's match percentage. D38's match percentage is like 75%. It means we have to come up with 75% of the cost. They'll fund the last 25. So it's a grant, yes, but it has a grant that has a big cost to it. Number two, I would say the bigger issue with BEST going forward is that BEST is tapped out.
It is.
BEST is tapped out. We're not going to be able to, I'm speaking we as the BEST board now, we are not going to be able to build new buildings in the future unless something drastically changes with the funding model at that state level. Because BEST has financed everything with COPs. And so when they built the building, they didn't just give the money to build that building, they financed that building on behalf of that district. And so that continual amount of financing has basically shrunk their available resources, best available resources, down to the point where all they have now is the opportunity for what they call cash grants, which are only available for things like roofs and basically, smaller projects, not whole building projects. So best is really going to be facing a crossroads here in the next year to 18 months about what is the future of it, because one of the big funding resources for BEST has been marijuana money, and marijuana money is going down because every other state is passing that. And so not as many people are coming here for their marijuana, they're staying home. And so, so it's a shrinking pot, no pun intended. For that. Yeah.
Well, we did use a BEST grant as part of the Schneider for the boilers that we did over at Lewis Plummer Middle School. That was supported with BEST grant, some BEST grant money. So that was a very, very collaborative effort. And we're working with Kathy.
We have a great BEST grant writer. Kathy's a great writer. I was just curious what the difference is, and that was really helpful. The match piece really plays into that.
Yeah, that's where we have to be careful on some of these grants, even speaking beyond BEST is, well, can we, just because there's a grant doesn't mean we should be going for it if we can't afford our share of it. And we have to prioritize what our share is sometimes as well.
Thank you.
Ron, did you have additional questions?
More a comment, but before I start that, Chris Taylor, I think given Brett's comments about BEST grants and POT, he might take my position as best sense of humor on the team here. Secondly, if you can go back one slide, Chris Coulter, please. The discussion right before Tiffany's thoughts and questions led me to a wonderful place that I wanted to at least exercise with the team here. It seems to me that on a summary basis, what I got out of this conversation was that we need to be thinking of our facilities in terms of agility and capacity to deliver what our student customers and our economic employer customers are demanding. And I see Chris nodding his head. So my first question is, am I getting this right?
Mr. Schwartz, yes, I would agree with you. One of the things that were coming out of the RTA audit that was done for the district a number of years ago were classrooms that were specifically designed for STEM. And every time I've gone back and talked to schools about, so what was the scope of this particular project, or what was the both the genesis and the focus, nobody seems to remember what their focuses were. But I gotta believe that sort of a STEM approach and how it can be replicated for today's students at everybody from elementary school to middle school to high school. I think that there is an opportunity to do so, working collaboratively with teachers, parents, and the communities that we serve.
Okay, so the answer was yes.
Yes.
Okay, second piece then is I would like to suggest that we as a team keep in our mind that any significant investment we make maps to achieving the goals for our students, our community, and our country that we are tasked with, which is creating agile, market-based facilities that gives all the kids that aren't going to four-year university type institutions an opportunity to be successful as they exit our system, which means specifically, and I'm just painting the picture so that make sure that we're all on the same page, hopefully, computer programming, master plumbers, carpenters, and welders, computer networking, cybersecurity certification, and practical work, and things like that, where the employers are less concerned about the degree that somebody holds and more concerned about the practical knowledge and capacity and experience that they bring in, so they can receive their return on investment in a matter of months versus a matter of years. We all concur?
I agree with you, Ron.
Thank you, Matt. Tiffany, Teresa, Chris?
I think, yes, absolutely. Of course, creating spaces for students to succeed. Not every student is four-year college bound, and having those opportunities, I agree. There's more that goes into that, though. There's manpower, there's space, there's interest. But as a vision, yeah, I think so. And I see us trying to do that also with our, with our programs we have at Lewis Palmer High School, for example, and some of the different things we're doing. So keeping that as part of our vision and our mindset, sure.
My point, just to be clear, is specific as it relates to investments in facilities. What I think Chris and Chris were talking about was what the macro findings are and what we're trying to invest in and build to, not just in our district, but as a country, are things that have the agility to do some of the examples I laid out. I'm sure there's plenty more. In fact, several may be far more practical than what I just pulled off the top of my head. But the bigger overarching thought here is, let's go down this path so that we make sure that the 25% of our students who aren't going to four-year educational facilities have wonderful opportunities to step out of our system and garner very high quality, very good paying, very long lasting jobs.
If I may, Ron, what I'm hearing you say is in direct alignment with our portrait of a graduate work, where I think we could lay the portrait of a graduate work on top of this to really start identifying those priorities, because much of what you're talking about are what do we want our graduates to look like, both the college bound and those who are not choosing that path because of the multiple pathways of the portrait of graduates. So I would like to figure out how we can make some alignment between that work and use that for visioning for capital needs as well, because I think they'll come closely together in their alignment.
I was exactly going to say that, Rick, and I wanted to add that it's about half of our students currently choosing to enter a four-year school immediately after graduation.
I knew you were both going to say it. That's why I brought this up. Thank you.
Well, I would add that the work that was done, probably one of your first bigger projects was on Grace Vest, and what came from that was an agile facility, right? It wasn't like we're going to zero in on one thing, but we wanted to make sure it was flexible,
space,
agile,
Flexible
for whatever the
space,
future brings.
21st century skills, focused, future ready student opportunities. And I would only just add to that, and I think we're all kind of nodding our heads here, is we see the need. We recognize that there is that desire to get there. I think, we do have some aspects of programming that we are using in reference to partnerships with Pikes Peak Community Colleges or college system and other resources. But Ron, I think if I can translate what I'm hearing you say is to do something here specifically for the kids in our community that could create more widespread opportunities that paves the path for multiple years into the future. I think, Tiffany, when you brought up the 50 years, it's like, on one hand, yeah, this may not be a 50-year presentation yet, but we're getting there. So I think it all blends together.
Yeah, I thank you for summarizing that in a simple phrase. The one thing I would add is I want to make sure that we really migrate from talking about it to doing it.
And we need the community's investment. I mean, that's
no value in having a discussion if we don't do.
And to Casey's point, having that community investment is important, and that flexible space, the reason that's important too is because things change. What we see today of the job market and the success beyond graduating high school today very well probably will change even 10 years from now. So if you're able to incorporate that flexible space, then you have that ability to respond to what it is then and now. And some things won't change. We will always need different skill sets and students and individuals to succeed and excel in different areas, but there are things that are outdated that aren't in demand versus what they were from when I graduated high school to what they are even today. Now I'm gonna date myself, that was 30 something years ago, but the point is that things, when you have a flexible ability to adapt to what the demands of the world are today and tomorrow.
Okay, so we need to move on
Yeah,
because
so-
we've got about 20 minutes left and about another.
Talk as fast as I can.
Oh, Casey, what, how do you wanna go?
Well, I'd like to still see through at least a little bit more of the funding
Okay.
conversation, because I feel like without that,
Okay.
this kind of sits a little bit in the air. And then I do have a thought about how we can shorten down the B3 to save us some time. So with that, Brett.
So let's just spend a couple minutes then on funding model. You see that slide that's on the screen now. This is kind of the industry. Where's this funding model?
APA, it comes from the Association of Physical Plant Administrators.
So
It's an industry standard.
So yeah, it's just a way to identify how much annual investment do you need in facilities to maintain the type of facility you want. And so 0 point, so it's in two categories: operations maintenance, and the other being life cycle renewal. So recurring annual budget guideline from their perspective would be 2 to 4% of current replacement value. Now that would be a lot of money for us. That would be $7 million if it's only 2%. And so for frame of reference, this year, what we put into capital was 2 million. So, it's not something that I don't think we're going to suggest that we get into this 2 to 4% range, but we need to realize where we're at and how close do we want to get to that? The 2% level, the $2 million that we had this year was equivalent to 4% of our general fund revenue, because this comes from general fund revenue. This annual funding only comes from general fund revenue, School Finance Act revenue. So how much of that School Finance Act revenue do we want to dedicate towards this priority? And in the past, if you think 10, 12 years back, and then prior to that, before the Great Recession, there was actually a statutory requirement that every school district had to allocate a certain percentage of School Finance Act general fund revenue towards capital maintenance. When the Great Recession came, that rule went out the window and it has not come back. But the need still exists, of course, and so that's something that we still need to aspire to. And so the $2 million again relates to 4% this year. I think that's a little bit low for what we're talking about, and so we might want to be able to say, and we need to set some consensus from the board perspective, is what is that percentage that we want to have? Is it a 4% number? Can we stretch that up to towards 5%, which would getting us up between $2.5 to $3 million? Mark, let's go. Or I've got this thing here. The one slide I'm going to skip ahead here to this one. And so this is a graphic that I put together to try and mirror or match what can be funding and financial opportunities and priorities to the operational and facility needs, if you will. And that is, again, think about these different levels of projects with different sources of money, different kinds of money. And so what I have there is a plan, a strategy to say, there are things that are small discretionary capital items that just happen out of Fund 10. These are more wants than needs. And this would happen mostly at the school level. Fund 15 is another fund, is a fund I'll be starting to receive this annual revenue allocation that we're talking about for the capital maintenance items. Fund 43 is when we start to get into bigger things, bigger projects like the geothermal type of project. Hey, that's a big project. It needs a specific source of funding, and it could even include some external funding. To some of the point Ron was making earlier, some external financing like we've done with Webster Bank on the energy project. That happens in Fund 43. And in Fund 44 are what I call capacity projects. This is where fee in lieu of land comes in, and or if we were to do some other financing for another big project. So this is the way that our funding strategy, our financial strategy, can align with our strategy in terms of facilities and pursuing and maintaining our condition index that we want to. gonna stop there for, and see what questions does that raise. I mean,
Okay, I guess I'll make a comment to start it. Number one, wonderful work. This is exactly, I think, the type of fiscal discipline that helps us avoid as many surprises as humanly possible. Secondly, my question is, and it may be a bit of a homework project, if we look at the last few years, what do we think our propensity or capacity is to fund this out of operating revenue versus other sources?
well, we, again, $2 million is what was allocated this year. That was down a little bit from prior years. And so it has been in that 4 to 5% window. I think in general, there is fluctuation on that year to year, but that is what we have been and what we should continue to do. But it's going to take a little bit more to get back into that level from where we're at now.
So we need to be at equilibrium in terms of our facilities, right? And we're below that right now, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is, if we embarked on a 3-year program to get to equilibrium and a degree of comfort, can we fund that out of operating revenues?
Well,
And not disrupt our core mission.
there it is. And so it's going to be a decision, a choice between priorities. Because whatever money we would allocate towards this is money that doesn't go to compensation, and vice versa. So this is why we need to tee this conversation up, because we're going to continue to have this conversation and make that what is going to be a hard decision. Whenever that decision is made, it's going to be a hard decision.
So here's my follow-on question. Is that a board level decision?
I believe it is.
Okay, based on your answer, can we request that you provide the board with 3 or 4 yes alternatives on how we manage through this? And then we'll take a hard look at them.
Yes, and I think that may be segue into the other part of the conversation we're going to have here. So that may be a good opportunity to go into the next agenda item.
Thank you.
But the next slide you have here shows that you want to push from 2 to 3 million.
Yes, so this is the group of projects that Chris and his team have identified for next year, for 23-24, and that total down there is just a shade under $3 million. And $3 million would be a full 6% allocation. So we would be taking a big increase next year. And so again, this will be the decision that has to be made, is, well, how much of that do we really want to pursue? Can we afford to pursue at the cost of operational priorities like compensation?
Well, I like what you're doing, because this, along with buses and other things, right, we can start looking at the big picture, so that every decision, we recognize what the trade-offs are, and we haven't made a habit of doing that, and we need to be doing that. So
That was our holding tap from today. I'm glad
I see it.
seen it through that lens.
Yep.
But I want to make sure, Ms. Upchurch, do you have any other responses or questions to this portion of what we've covered thus far, or Ms. Phillips or Mr. Clausen?
This page right here was what I wanted to digest. So this is what I want to be able to digest. And if I have questions, I can.
And
Just so you know, there's already been a lot of push on Coulter and his team to say, we have to get this down to something.
Yeah.
So this has already been gotten down to $3 million. I know we're gonna have to push it further. But well, you're bigger.
This is part of our regular board session. So this is our work session in preparation. So, we have a couple of weeks. And so in this case, if we have questions, do we reach out to Chris, or how do you guys want to handle that?
well, I think if it's facilities project focused related in terms of the what and the where, it's definitely Chris. I think if it turns into more of a funding type of a conversation, I think it's more of Brett. But again, what I'll say is you can funnel any of those questions through me, and we can get on the line really quickly with any or all of us to lean into what's on your mind.
Quick question,
Yep.
twofold. One is, would it be okay to just email the board this spreadsheet in PDF form or whatever you're comfortable with, so we can
Sure.
digest it? Not have to dig it up and then move it over to our laptops or print it if that's what we're inclined to do. Second question, is this what you've shown in these two slides in any prioritization order?
Chris, do you want to speak to that?
The prioritization, as you can see, all of these are priority ones. You can see I've got a priority column in there. We do have priority 2s and 3s actually in the overall spreadsheet. You're not seeing every single project that is in the recommended plan for potential execution next fiscal year, but these are the tops of the top. So yes.
Okay, is it of value for you to prioritize what's on these two slides? If, for example, the sum total of this is $7 million, it's far more, I can tell, but just to cite an example, and we have 5 million, you would obviously pick, right?
Correct. And for example, you can see there are projects in here to kind of change all of the parking aspect. So it's something that's a little bit different. These a little bit different than normal, deferred maintenance types of projects. But you can see, I think it's $450,000 that we have in there for parking lot changes associated with what's going on at Lewis Palmer Middle School because of the issues that we have there. Obviously, that would be a one-time project. We certainly wouldn't probably see that project again or something typical or like that. But we have a few of those. And even to the point that I talked a little bit about earlier, the estimates that we have in there are based on current estimates that we have for roofs and things of that nature. I've got $700,000 in there for roofs. I'd like to know sooner rather than later that, that's something that we can go ahead and commit to, knowing that if we don't contract that until, later in the year, the numbers are going to go up. And if we wait too long, those projects won't be able to be executed because the materials won't be available.
I guess I apologize. I may have missed something here. I'm confused. Can you prioritize this, or is it not worth doing?
Prioritize the number ones.
Yeah.
We can take a shot at it. Absolutely. I think you could prioritize that into 1s and 2s and maybe even some 3s.
I just want to know which, I think it's valuable for us as a team to understand which of these 20 or so things, which are the first 5.
Okay. We can do that.
I'm not asking you to change the 1 and the 2 ranking, because I know it's a degree of urgency, right? And risk.
Right.
But what I am asking you to do is give us a tool to help us make you be successful.
Well, let me add, because I heard earlier that you're going to be talking to the building leaders, and so there's a lot. Have you already been through that process?
On some of the schools, you'll see some of the schools that have a little bit higher EFCI value. That's because those schools have gotten back to me and we've added those projects.
So you don't have, it's not ready, really.
I would say March.
Okay, did you hear that, Ron?
I did, and good catch, Chris. Thank you.
I just didn't want to put the expectation ahead of practice.
Some is done, some is done.
Yep.
Just one quick question.
Mm-hmm.
This suggested fiscal year 24 cap reserve projects. Does this take care of, obviously this fits into the 5-year plan. Is this the 5-year plan? So we talked about a 5-year plan.
It's phase 1 is what
Okay.
I probably refer to it
That's
as.
a cap reserve component.
Yeah.
But I mean, the 5-year plan would include everything from operating to cap reserve to maybe even something else like a geothermal project that comes up, or a leach field at Prairie Winds. I mean, those are a little bit different too.
This is great. This is great work. I look forward to seeing how we get. I think this builds such a strong foundation for as we're moving forward.
Good.
I concur. Great work.
Teresa or Matt, is there anything else before we move ahead?
I don't have anything. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. And Teresa, I'm not sure if you're. She had that. Okay.
I don't see.
She, I think was on the line, but maybe I think she's trying to track as best she can, so I'm gonna move us forward if that's okay, Mr. Chairman. Okay. Here's what I would propose, and actually, let me do a quick time check because I just want to be mindful. First of all, from a board perspective, we're almost at 10, and does anyone have to cut off, or how much more time do we have to work with for our last couple of items?
I have a call until 30. I have to take.
10:30. Do we have an extra 30, Ms. Upchurch? Ron or Matt?
Yes.
I have a hard stop at 10 o'clock.
Okay, so Matt, I just want to honor that, and what I'll share for your benefit while you're still on the line for the next few minutes. And then we'll spend a little bit of time. I think what I'm really getting to is we're going to forego the breakout portion of the event just because it takes more time than it might be worth at this point in time. But what we'd like to do, and it extends, as you can see, exactly from the conversation that we just had, what opportunities for competitive advantage we used initially as a term, and really we're thinking about this more than just from a landscape of compensation, although that's what we've been spending a lot of time on, obviously over the past year. But we wanted to just think through the strategic plan lens through this notion of competitive opportunity, essentially what sets us apart as a school system as it pertains to all of what we do. So I think this will connect with a little bit of what we were doing earlier, and what it might be helpful to do in foregoing the breakout is just a quick round robin with each priority. I still want to keep that intact if we can. And Mark, it might be good to bring up the slide that has those zoomed in on. Here you go. Okay, perfect. Wonderful. So through the overarching lens of what competitive opportunities exist within each of our priority areas, we spend a lot of time right now just thinking about operations and facility planning, but maybe we can do a quick share out led by sort of the representative individual who takes the bulk of that priority area. So we're going to start with Mr. Frampton on safe and healthy schools. And then we're just going to do a quick share out on each. And then we're going to hover on valuing our people just a little bit more to set the stage for where we are and what some of our next steps are, both in terms of the activities and the timeline that we have in mind. Does that situate well for our board's benefit and at least frame the next 30 minutes? Okay, or let's call it about 20, 25, because I know there's a little bit of time we want to have toward the end. So Rick, I know that put you on the spot, but do you want to tee that up for safe and healthy schools in any kind of way and then open it up for some additional
I don't have a ton to add from our previous conversations. We've been very proactive with some policy revisions that you've been aware of with AC and the like. We've been staying on top of a lot of our really crucial building safety issues, and that you're all familiar with, the vestibules and so forth. We're continuing to work with our counselors and our staff around SEL curriculum and implementation of mental health supports in our schools. So all of that, there's not substantial changes moving forward. And we're going to just continue to work closely to make sure that we're addressing these issues and responding to anything that comes to us as necessary as individual pieces and parts come to play. One of the things that I'm going to be working on with our buildings with a lot of focus this year that I'll bring you into the loop once we're closer to resolution is we're going to be revamping our handbooks at our secondary schools and aligning them so they're aligned to policy. We're looking at what's called a restorative justice approach to discipline, and we're constantly looking at how we can make a shift from what we would consider a traditional discipline approach to students, which is punitive in nature, to more of a restorative discipline approach, which is more learning and helping students recover from making bad choices or mistakes in our schools. So I'll continue to keep you abreast on progress we make in those two areas as well.
I have a question on this overall competitive opportunity.
Yeah.
So in the business world, we sometimes would use a SWOT analysis for these various areas. What are our strengths, our weaknesses, what are the opportunities, what are our threats? And I'm wondering, there may be something different than that for academia, but I would kind of like to see. I mean, when I see exploring competitive opportunities, that's what I think about.
Yep.
So the question becomes, how do we do that for each of these 6 areas? And to build on what Rick was saying, I'm not sure it's new work. It's how do we present those so that we have better engagement with our broader community about the needs, right? Because at the end of the day, the decisions that we have to make, the tough decisions of limited resources and lots of need, we have to decide, well, what gets prioritized? And I think I'm just going to use SWOT analysis because I don't know better for these 6 areas. And then we have a big picture that kind of synthesizes what that means.
That might be more meaningful for us to your point about the methodology that we can leverage to essentially engage in this ongoing, right? Because the priorities, we all agree, these are the right things to focus in on. And as we're making decisions, to your point, what's the new input or information that we're using to understand where we are compared to where we're trying to go, which comes back to this whole framework that we're talking about. How does this align to vision, mission, values, and our goal indicators? And so that might be, you know, we thought about kind of spending some time in a very open dialogue sort of format, but that might be even more helpful for us, Chris, is putting that overlay of a SWOT or some other type of approach to examining those dynamics, and then really using those as the information. Now, I do think if it's okay, we'd like to spend a little bit of time with respect to valuing people, because obviously, again, we're in that space right now where we've been wrestling with that for some time. So we do have a couple of slides that I think speak to that one component. But before I move ahead, I'm just curious what other feedback is that would be helpful for us to really frame the process up that we're talking about.
May I throw out a thought?
Ron, go ahead. A little louder, please.
Okay, we might consider, I'm very familiar with SWOT's really great tool, especially in this scenario. There's another one we might consider also called the Magic Quadrant. It comes from Gartner Consulting Group.
What?
Magic Quadrant.
It's really commonly used, and it's a bit more macro than SWOT. So it depends on, I just want to throw it out there. We can talk about it later because I know we're tight on. Okay.
Good point, though.
Thanks, Ron. And I think we lost, Teresa's still trying to listen, but she's having a hard time with her connection right now to weigh in. So with that,
well, I've sort of asked to defer.
I think it's I think it's helpful, actually. If I can, it might be helpful for us to do a little bit of the zoom in that we had prepared, though, with valuing our people.
Good with that.
Okay, so let's move that toward our next few slides there. Nice effects, by the way. Okay, so when we're thinking about this specific priority area, we have 3 big buckets that we are currently specifying or categorizing, which speak to what in all of our conversations with our employees right now continues to be themes that we're hearing. And so we have a compensation theme that speaks to pay, which reflects pay schedules. Within that, there's regular pay. There's also supplemental pay in the form of bonuses or other types of supplemental opportunities. There's also benefits, but it's anything that obviously has to do with dollars and cents and how our folks are actually paid. The second big bucket, and we're using the term calendar because it's kind of a nice 3C view here, but it really gets to the core of time allocation. how we organize everything from the working day to how we set up systems and practices that are anchored in a calendar. And, you know, everything from days off to hours in a day, paid time off, some of those different examples of that category. The last one, and this one is less measurable, although there's ways that we can certainly assess how we're doing, but it's this sort of big category of culture. So it's everything from how teams are operating or being supported. It's how leadership, and leadership not just in the sense of formal title and authority, but teacher leadership, staff leadership, and empowerment. Essentially the feeling that people have and the experience of what it's like to be part of the system that they're currently working in. So within those three big buckets, that's where we're organizing ourselves to ensure that we have a good understanding of where we are to where we want to be and what are some possible steps that we can take in mapping that out. And I kind of love that we're having this conversation both in terms of immediate state or short-term future state, as well as that longer term, right? Because we have to plan for this both in terms of decisions that can be made going into this next year, but we're also thinking about this in a much more longer term exercise as well. So some of these next steps are, and I just want to kind of speak to this a little bit in terms of timeline, as well as answer any questions you have about process. We are currently in the process of drafting next year's pay schedules, given budgetary assumptions that can hopefully point us toward a review and possibly, or at least in theory, a temporary adoption, knowing that it still takes being able to adopt the final year budget to make it all happen. But our staff are really wanting to know, hey, what is it going to look like for next year, right? So that's happening. And that's work that with our new staff collaboration committee, we're getting a lot of good opportunities for some two-way feedback there. And we see that staff collaboration committee as not just the work that happens in that particular meeting space, but the goal in that is continuous conversation that's two-way communication through each of our departments, each of our sites, so that all approximate 800 employees' voices are represented in that effort. And Brett, anything else you want to speak to, at least in the compensation bubble for that right now?
There's actually another C I want to add to this conversation, and that's capacity, and it's really about staffing mix, because and Mr. Taylor and I have talked a little bit about this. We've talked rate and volume on revenue side. Yep. How many students do we have, and what's the rate we're getting funding at? There's the staffing side too, of how many staff do we have in what roles and how are they being compensated. So part of that compensation question is also going to be the capacity and the staff design question. And so I think that's going to be, so I just want you to know that that's going to be conversations that we want to have with principals to say, here's the staffing that you have in your building. How do we want to staff going forward? Because is there an opportunity to rearrange or work with attrition to maybe slim down a couple of roles, and then to if we lower our volume side, maybe we can increase our rate side, so it all can play together there.
Excellent. I think it also goes back to the conversation that we were having with Mr. Coulter around program needs, and how have we staffed in the past compared to how do we need to change to meet customer demands in the future too.
So if I can add, I think that adds into that, again, that 5-year plan and beyond of when we're looking at our priorities of what to expect moving forward. What does that capacity look like? What is our values on? We talked about this when we first got on the board. Ideally, how many students do we want in a classroom? Ideally, what do we want a school or a classroom to look like? So I think that adds into that program. Am I on this? Is that where you're getting at, Mr. Ridgway?
Yeah. So you said it well.
Yes, you did.
John had a quick question. He was wondering if we had a model for predicting how competitors will adjust in the compensation realm for 23-24.
We don't have a model per se. What we have is information. And so Misty, I don't know, maybe you can speak to some of that as we.
Before you do though, Another question I have, and I appreciate Ron and Teresa drafting communication from the board.
Okay.
One of the questions I had around that was, we're aware of what our peer group districts have done in terms of mill levy overrides. We're aware of that. Are we aware of how much of that actually was committed to compensation? Because we can't necessarily assume it was all compensation, can we?
No, we can't assume, and that's a good question. That is a hard question to answer, because it depends on their chosen level of financial transparency for us to look at it from the outside. And there's also their own strategic approach to it. You know, do they use mill levy override to handle certain kinds of costs, which free up that money for compensation? So maybe there's a second or a third tier effect on compensation. So it's a really great question that will really be hard to answer with any great confidence in detail.
I think what we can speak to, and when we go back to the market analysis that was conducted based on last year's data, we at least have, through the lens of a pay schedule, that we can sit down and compare both our licensed educators as well as our classified staff. We still have that data that speaks to where things were as recent as a year ago. We haven't necessarily, and we're not intending on bringing back the full-blown study the way that we operationalized it specific to D38. But what we'll know is we have a district, for example, who's targeting a 6% bump or greater or less than. Some of that, a lot of that, to the degree that the state budget is what drives what additional available revenues are, that's essentially what we'll have as information to help guide more of our understanding. So I think just the simple answer to the question is we'll use all available information to continue to strive toward getting as competitive as we can, knowing that there's still a gap that we're having to address.
So I think what would be helpful for me is if we could define what our pay scales should look like, given the competitive environment we sit in. In other words, we have a pretty good idea how much we're underpaid. If we had a pretty good idea of what we were going to do.
Yes.
Now, why don't we say, you know, here's the quote unquote ideal pay scale.
Sure.
And then in the recruitment process, can we try and bring people in at the ideal pay scale? Now, I know that could create a ton of problems, but hear me out. So the point being is, it would also enable us to say, here's the gap. In real time, all the time. What is the gap? Because if we're not constantly understanding the deficiency that exists, it could get forgotten. So how do we do that? And one way is what I was asking about, is here's what it would look like. So here's our budget. This is what it would look like if we would have adapted our pay scales based on our plan, right? Based on all that work that was done. Here's the deficiency. Now, what are we going to do about that? Teresa asked the question. What's the time frame for budgeting, communicating our intentions that will allow us to help retain more of our teachers' staff? And then she put in brackets, I'd like to hear specificity.
Specificity?
Thank you.
Say it twice. Say it 3 times. No, I think our conversation with the staff collaboration committee to this point has been to indicate that by spring break, we want to have clarity for that for staff. That's still not soon enough for some staff, I know, but it's that tension that we have to manage between the availability of information. When can we afford to publish something?
So I want to, this is important. This was the message I really was trying to get to. Chris and Brett, you came forward and said, we need to be spending $3 million a year to kind of stay status quo.
Within facilities.
We should be spending, I heard, almost double that if we wanted to stay in the right percentage, right? I would like to have the same kind of information from compensation. And what I described is one way to do that. This is what it should be. But given the constraints, this is what it is.
Yeah.
And what's that delta look like?
Yeah, definitely.
And I just want to, yes, to all of that. Teresa, also to your question, and I know you won't be able to nod as you're hearing this necessarily. I would tell you, these are conversations that we continue to have right now. So it's not like we're just waiting till March to say, here's what we're going to do. What I would say is the conversations are, and the feedback that we're getting from staff is what's driving us to, here's the decision that has to be made. Now, what do you need from us in that? And what can we do to clarify as best we can in that process? So I'll come to that word clarity, as clear as we can be about here's what we have in front of us and here's what we're trying to do. I think that is the ongoing day in, day out process that we're striving for as we're communicating with our people.
So we have an extended facilities condition index. Did I get it right?
Enhanced.
Can we have an extended staff condition index?
It's an interesting
Literally,
term,
what we were presented today was very helpful.
yeah,
Because it says this is what we could be doing.
yep.
This is what we've been doing, and this is what we want to do.
Mhm.
And what we want to do isn't quite where we should get to, but it was a great presentation.
It's a nice way to speak to, here's how we're getting to where we're trying to go, even though we may not be able
And where we're trying to
yes,
go.
exactly.
Brett, is that reasonable this year? By March or whenever?
Something in that regard. Yes, I think it still would be fairly rough. And there's a lot of subjectivity to it, in honesty, right? Because there's a lot of assumptions that have to be made on top of other assumptions to that.
And let me build off that response a little bit and also come back to something that I know Ron brought up at the last meeting, which was, what do our staff really want?
Mhm.
Well, it depends on who you talk to. It really does, because different people have different motivations depending on where they are in their career and what other options or opportunities may exist. And we're sensitive to all that. I don't know that there's ever a time where we can get to every single, we're not going to be able to speak to everyone equally across the board. What I think we can demonstrate, though, is what does parity look like compared to our other systems? And here is some of the competitive opportunities that exist, both with respect to pay, time, and culture, as well as this capacity concept that also was surfaced today. So
This is where the SCC is the great conversation and sounding board for those.
And I just want to make sure that people realize, and this is important for both our staff as well as our board and our community to have this understanding, that SCC is one of those vehicles. It's also, that's a group that we can't put everything on. So we have to make sure that there are multiple channels as we're having these conversations. I can tell you principals have them all the time. We're having them with principals. There's other channels and opportunities for those voices to be heard. I will do a quick plug on this and tell you that our next SCC meeting has been scheduled for January 25th. So it's a couple weeks from tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we would be more than happy to have a board member or two, or whoever wants to show up to at least sit in and get a feel for how that process is working. So I appreciate this is actually even more, a little bit more than what we maybe had envisioned in having this conversation, but I think we got to where we were trying to. Is there anything else that we can help answer or clarify?
I think if we take this approach, it's going to be very helpful.
Okay,
I would like to hear from Misty.
please. Yes.
Do you have, because, I mean, this is a lot of, this is your lane. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as we've all discussed for quite a while now, that's the difficulty. Because like Casey just said, some people are motivated by money. Some people are wanting the money, but time is a motivation. The culture is a big piece of it, just like we talked about our values. I mean, that is it. That is a big piece of it. When employees that I've talked to are considering what they're going to do, their comment is, if I can find a field like I have here, but make more money. That's a huge factor. And that is our big task, is how do we help them see the value to stay here that is not financial, but intrinsic. And so, you know, that's what I'm grappling with, is how do I get that message across to people that we're trying to attract to come here, but also the people we're trying to retain. And so, you know, I think that we're all working on that, and SCC is a big part of that. You know, what are other ideas that we can do as a district to help people decide they want to stay?
So if I understand what you're saying is the culture is important to them, but if they can find another school district, say Cherry Creek or Douglas County or D20, that has a very similar culture to D38, but pays more, then that's the attraction.
And they have to make that decision. I mean, every individual has their own decision they have to make on that, obviously. And what is the big motivating factor? What are their individual circumstances? You know, we heard many stories in SCC about people who are working extra jobs. We have one teacher that rents her home out during the summer and lives in a camper, so that she can make ends meet. And so, you know, those are factors that are very real for each individual. Single parents, one income families, those kinds of things.
And these 3 points, which if we add a fourth, those are the points that are part of their own evaluation process. And I think one of the things that we always want to be careful of is to know where our strengths are, if that's a culture issue, and not sacrifice too many of any of those strengths to try and improve the weaknesses, right? We got to make sure that we know what our strengths are and not lose those.
Exactly. And pull in safe and healthy schools. And, you know, student safety and buses and those kinds of things. So.
Yes.
So I appreciate that you brought up vision, because that's what was in my mind too, is I would think that the vision that we talked about earlier fits right in with that culture piece.
Absolutely.
Of who are we as Lewis Palmer School District 38? What does that mean to our staff? And I understand that it's intangible. One of the things I think I've heard is them being heard. And to your point, Casey, there's going to be multiple opinions, multiple perspectives on this is what our staff need from our district. But being heard and having that voice at the table with this committee, for example, I think is huge. Being heard, for example, with the calendar where it fits in with graduation times. We've moved our graduation times to a Saturday. That may seem simple and small, but for some folks, that really does matter. It makes a difference. So I think when they feel heard, and that's part of that culture that goes into that, is feeling valued and feeling that their voice is being heard at the table. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, just to echo one more comment on that, although this could keep going and going, is the things that we have control over right now, like being really clear about here's what we're grappling with and here's what we want to hear from you and here's how that's helping drive us toward decisions. I mean, all day long, we're going to do everything that we can with what the tangibles are that we have control with. What we don't have control with right now are those limitations, like, well, there's a finite amount of resource. So those are some of the truths that we have to, and people get it. I mean, I think to some degree, this budgeting season will probably be as robust of a opportunity for people to really understand, here's what we have available, and here are the tough decisions that we have to make in front of us. So yes, we desire to have ongoing feedback that helps drive all of that. It puts you all in a tough place, like we feel sometimes too, because ultimately we're decision makers, right? And how do we make sure that we help people understand the steps that are going to be involved into making that decision for the greater good across the board, even though it will feel like it's not going to be able to satisfy everybody's hopes or desires. And that's just the reality of how these things are going to work. But I think
But all of this fits together to really allow us to look at what should the right bill be in our school system to support what we think is the ideal public education system.
Yes.
We've never done this yet. So we're beginning to get close enough that we can just say, yeah, this is what it should be.
It's a really good point.
And we, you know, we totally focused on compensation this last time. And we got away from the big picture, what it really needs to be. Now, I think it was good. What we did was good, is the need's real and it didn't change. That's the nice thing about the work for the last 3 years is you've got most of the work ready. It's just how we present it, how we walk the talk now, of actually doing something. Because something still needs to be done at the
Yes,
end
it
of
does.
the day here.
Yes, it does. That's exactly right.
And I think what we're trying to do is just get it focused. And again, this entire presentation today was the best in my 5 years I've ever participated in. Not the content. Forget the content for a minute. It's how you prepared and how you presented. Because it really looked at the big picture. It looked at what can we do? What have we done? What we should be doing perhaps, and here's the gap. I mean, that approach is why I asked the question, could we do the same thing with HR? Because in my mind, it's a great approach.
That's very helpful feedback.
And the front end, Mark, I know you were just the graphic artist, but all of you, I really appreciate that vision and the values and how you linked it together. And I see the strategic plan just being a part of that now. It's awesome. So really, really good work.
Thank you.
And it's just the first meeting of the year. Maybe I need to resign. I don't know. I think we're there.
Not there yet, but yeah.
Close.
Well, thank you for those comments. Recognizing where we are with time here. Here's what I propose. We do have a draft agenda that we can keep working on fine tuning online. And
those were my board member reflections already. Do you
Yep.
have any reflections you'd like to add?
4
Tiffany?
points. So you already covered one of my points, so I don't have to make that point. Compensation and rewarding and retaining our staff is still a #1 priority in my mind. But that doesn't mean that the rest of our system takes a back burner. So I think that what I appreciate about this is that's still a priority that we're pushing forward. But our facilities and our students have that priority still exists. So I really appreciate that we are continuing to move forward in the bigger picture, the longer range plan. And that I think is how the compensation discussion fits into that. So I appreciate that. I still like the idea, this is a reflection of what we can do as a board, to my fellow board members, being present in the buildings. I think us continuing and making sure that we are visiting each and every site, we're attending our PTO meetings, just at least once a quarter or once a semester, that we are present and that our staff and our students and our parents see us and know that we are listening and that they are important to us. I really do, Chris, like the idea that you brought up, and I would love to see us do this in the coming years of doing work sessions at our different sites. There are some school districts throughout Colorado that have started to do that they're taking their meetings to their community instead of expecting their community to come to their meetings. So that's just an idea I had. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much. The timing this early morning probably wouldn't work at the sites, because if we went to the sites, we'd want parents and teachers and everybody to, so it'd be an after school or whatever. I mean,
likely, yeah. I mean, we can present
a plan.
an option for you all to consider. If
Only if sites agree to this, though, right?
Okay. Yeah, we can get their feedback on it too.
I don't want to force something, but I think it is a really good idea. Ron, do you have any reflections you'd like to share before we adjourn?
I think the team's heard enough from Ron. I'm unreflective this morning. Thank you.
You're the man.
Well, thank
He's
you.
trying to be more humorous than Brent.
Go for it.
It's tough goal.
That's a tough look.
So I think then we're adjourned until whenever.
January 23rd.
January 23rd.
We do not have a board meeting next Monday, as it is an observance of MLK Day.
Awesome.
Hey, great job, Casey and team also.
Thank you all.